We're all set.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Michigan ASLA's Diverse Perspective Series webinar. We will be waiting for a few minutes for everybody to join in and to settle down. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Maybe we'll give it two more minutes. Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Anhad Vishwanath, and I'm a member of the Michigan ASLA's DEI committee and a student at Michigan State University majoring in landscape architecture. Tonight, the DEI committee of Michigan ASLA aims to celebrate and promote diversity and inclusion in the profession and celebrate the work and achievements of students and professionals. One of the ways in which we do that is through a webinar series called the Michigan ASLA Diverse Perspective Webinar Series, wherein we give a platform to students and professionals to talk about themselves, their experiences in the profession, and even any projects that they've worked on, in terms of the experiences that they have had so far. And in turn, we also aim to highlight them through this effort and celebrate their achievements. Tonight, we will be joining with Sami Sikanas, who is a landscape architectural designer at Marvel, and can share my screen. This is her bio. With a background in environmental science and urban studies, Sami views landscape architecture as the perfect balance of natural and social systems, capable of fostering community development through sustainable and beautiful design. After completing her MLA degree from the University of Michigan, she established her landscape career in New York City, where she started as a Future Green Studio and then with W Architecture and Landscape. She currently contributes her expertise at Marvel, where she has been instrumental in various urban landscape projects around New York City, including parks, plazas, and waterfronts. She also curates the Cure Landscapes platform, investigating the relationship between identity and design. Sami's work is also characterized by her dedication to creating landscapes that promote both equity and well-being, while also honoring history and context. Her formal education and hands-on experience equip her with a unique perspective to steer landscape architecture towards a more inclusive and sustainable future. Without any further ado, I hand it over to Sami.
Thank you. I'm Sami. I'm honored to be here, and I will be sharing my presentation called Rooted in Nature. Let me pull up my screen. So, I was gonna take this time to talk about projects that I'm working on currently because that's where my mind is at, of course. Um, I I started at Marvel um 2.5 years ago now, and I actually just became registered, so that's why there's a PLA next to my name, and no longer a landscape architectural designer, now formally an landscape architect. But yeah, so during my past 2.5 years there, I've been working on a few different affordable housing projects in the Bronx, and each of them have their own um, special relationship to nature, which is what I'll be talking about today. There are three of them in the Bronx, and I'm going to start with the Bronx Grove, which is all the way at the top there to the furthest north, almost bordering with, Yonkers up there, Westchester. The middle one, the second one I'll talk about is Starhill, working my way down, and then the Bronx Point is on the Harlem River, actually. And you know, I know that maybe people in Michigan don't know that much about the Bronx, or maybe you do, but we're situated just to the northeast of Manhattan, and Central Park is there. You can see that for context, and the Hudson River is to the left. Um, so I'll just go through these three different projects and explain the process of each of them, and get into even some current construction photos. They're all currently under construction at different phases. Um, so I- I'll start with the Bronx Grove, and I'll caveat that some of these started in the design phase without me, and then they're moving into construction where I've taken them over. So I'm sharing some slides from the design phase to kind of give you the story, and then I'll share some photos um from construction. So the Bronx Grove is this set of two different buildings in the middle here with in the blue. So it's these kind of mid-rise affordable housing units that are actually on both sides of a block. So there's 202nd Street here and 203rd Street over here, and then in the middle there's a courtyard. And we're in a really interesting site because, as you can see, we're really close to this parkway here, Parkway Greenway, and we're really close to transit systems, the B and D subway line, the 4 subway line, and we're right in the middle of the two. So it's kind of this perfect location to connect to infrastructure and transit, and fill in this vacant lots on this block. So part of the design process was looking at the context around the development, and you can see the streets are all pretty narrow, but they do have these lush, tree canopies on each side. And that's what we're highlighting here a bit. So we wanted to plant more trees along the streets, and have a grove of green inside the courtyard, which is maybe why it ended up being called the Bronx Grove by the client after we ended up designing this, but I think they might have taken a cue from our design. So you can see here on the bottom is 202nd Street. So there's one building on 202nd Street, and then there's another building on 203rd up to the top. And in between are this courtyard, which is bordered to the right of the screen here by this driveway that connects the two developments. So it's this really narrow space, and it also we're also dealing with a lot of interesting topography, which is very characteristic of the Bronx. And as you'll see with my other projects going forward, it's a very typical condition to have steep slopes. In Michigan, most everything's flat. I'm from Michigan, um, so I remember it there, and most of Manhattan and Brooklyn are also pretty flat, but then when you get to the Bronx, you're getting more topography, and the geology is different between the two. So we'll get into that more a little bit later, but here you can see that one side of the development is a lot taller than the other side, and the driveway is sloped down, and the courtyard either has to step one way or or in the middle, one way or the other, or in the middle, and we ended up going with more of the even approach. So there's this large drop from one side to the other, which we had to mitigate with some type of barrier or boundary. One side is much more shaded than the other because south is to the bottom of this page. So the sun, it is shaded or is blocked by this building before it hits the courtyard. And like I said, it's pretty narrow for both sides because they both have to split into their respective residents. And here's a sunshade analysis that we did early on that shows the level of shade that one side gets versus the other. And even with that limited space, we wanted to pack it with as much programming as possible. So we tried to relate to the adjacent uses in the building, like the kitchen extension. Maybe you could sit outside and eat. Maybe you can even have some passive recreation like yoga or just sitting and reading. And then obviously gardens and bringing in that grove aspect. Like we said, we could have mitigated the topography in a few different ways. Um, and here are some of the sketches early on of how you could do that, whether it's through terracing or mounding or yeah, I guess depending on those, you could change the geometry to either be rectilinear or curvilinear too. And we ended up going with something more like the left. I'm showing how our design developed over time. So, you get to some parties and then to some sketches. And you can see here that, we're dealing with a great change in topography. We developed it to about this level and then got to this, which is kind of our schematic plan here. And you can see there's these undulating berms that have some topography on them to kind of mask this retaining wall on both sides. And then there's some sloping for some paved areas for seating and for relaxing, like these groves of trees you can sit within. So another, we're in a really urban environment and we're trying to be rooted in nature and try to reference nature as much as possible. And this is actually a construction photo. And one of the materials that we really wanted to highlight were these granite blocks, which are natural and not natural, a lot like landscape architecture itself. They're a natural material made out of granite, which references to some degree the Bronx geology. But but it's also obviously cut up and formed in these regular blocks. And one way that we wanted to, we could have quarried these and taken them from a quarry and, extracted them from the earth, but these are actually repurposed. There's this awesome reclaimed stone company that we worked with out of Connecticut that sources these blocks from decommissioned bridges, um, and other large projects that, maybe need to be modernized or updated. So then instead of just scrapping all the stone, the blocks, which are beautiful, as you can see, have been saved and salvaged, and we're trying to use them on the site as seating elements primarily, and to mitigate some of the grade as well. So this is just a few weeks ago, this summer. So we're laying them out here, which was, you could kind of see the retaining wall here, and this border. So if you remember maybe some of the plan before, this is what we're looking at right here, forming out the border of these blocks and the retaining wall corner here, looking down onto um, the 203rd Street side. So it's a pretty big drop, and we tried to, um, we're gonna fill it in with planting and hopefully have vines growing up these walls, and um, you know, try to mitigate the quote unquote ugliness, or the unfortunate constraint of having a big retaining wall dividing the site. But I think with all the lush vegetation that'll come after, I think it'll be hidden a bit more. So that's Bronx Grove, and hopefully I'll have some more construction photos in the future. It hasn't advanced much further than that, but reach out to me later and I'll give you an update. But this is Starhill now, and it's a really interesting site again in the Bronx, and we're dealing with a lot of topography. So here from the top of the page down and around this corner, you can see it basically slopes steeply down all the way to the right. And that's mitigated by this, our development site that has these two large towers, phase one to the left and phase two to the right. And there was an existing building on this site, and it kind of sat on this bluff. But the nonprofit that occupied the space and was the owner of the land, they're demoing their building and rebuilding their base here, and they're serving their residents above them. It's all transitional housing, so it's people who were formerly incarcerated or formerly homeless, and the services are located in the ground floors. So I'll get into the design a bit more here. So like I said, we're kind of like wrapped around, kind of like a peninsula by these sloping streets, and it's kind of like a river running around this big boulder of a site, and the two buildings are connected with this one level of amenity space that has a terrace on the top as well. And this is an early schematic sketch, but it's advanced a bit more since then. But really the idea was that there was this front public park, or what we've called a front yard, and then there's the rear yard, which is only for residents. And there we have garden beds and passive recreation areas, as well as some play areas. And then in the front yard, it's more of like a park that really the public can access from the street here. And this is where it meets grade, and then as you on this end, it really has to be a stair because the slope is so extreme, and there's so much bedrock there that you can't really blast through it to make a big sloping path. You kind of with switchbacks kind of have to go up directly with a stair, and so you can really only access it through one route within a wheelchair, and then but we're trying to make it as an equal of experience as possible while you're in the park. um I'll go further into some of our process here. So we really wanted to shelter this green space and make sure that we didn't just occupy the whole lot with building. We really wanted to make sure that there was an amenity for the residents, but also for the public. Because currently or at the time, pre-existing conditions where uh there was this large wall that wrapped around the entire side, and I'll show photos of that in a second. But it really wasn't accessible to the public at all. So in addition to building up and building affordable housing and creating amenity for the residents, we're also providing an amenity for the neighborhood itself, which we thought was important. And what we're trying to do here with our design is to make sure that we maintain this view platform that you're higher up over the street, and when with our buildings try to hold the street wall but maintain a pocket to shelter the green space. And then as we do want to lower a bit of the grade so that the bedrock could be revealed. And like I said, we're creating a public amenity. So some of our inspiration images. So I wanted to embrace the geology and ecology of the Bronx, and use art to engage the community and reflect the residents there. This is another image of how we wanted to peel back the wall that was here and show some of the bedrock below to reference the local geology. This is a photo from the site showing some of the rock peeking through, but you could see that it was kind of surrounded by some lawn and weeds, and this is that really tall wall that exists right now. I couldn't even tell you, maybe 30 feet tall. I wish I had a photo there for scale, but you can kind of count the bricks. And we wanted to peel it back. So the top image is the existing conditions of the wall, and like I said, it gets really tall right here at these points. And the line that's kind of hard to see, but it's in yellow behind it, is the bedrock. And we had to get geotechnical surveys and borings to understand where the bedrock was beneath the surface, because not all of it was revealed. And we had studied a couple conditions, either stepping in the wall or doing this, like what we call the offset wall, which is holding a consistent height the entire way. But we ended up going with this stepped wall for a multitude of reasons. And one of them was to really use the existing brick. We didn't want to have to build this sloped wall would almost require it to be a new wall made out of concrete or something, to make it have that sloped top. But with the stepped wall, we could actually keep the existing bricks and just cut it down at certain points. So that's what we ended up doing. We're just lowering the wall instead of replacing it entirely. Here's some more photos of that type of condition, and here's some scale for you. Here it's actually even exposed bedrock on the side, not just the brick, but here's a sketch of our process, either that the offset wall we called it, or the stepped wall. And there it is. There's a person for scale. But we also want to have a viewing area out. So kind of this, it's nicer from the street when you're as you're walking, but it's also nicer when you're on the site from either the public or the resident point of view. And we actually just got these renders in, I think yesterday or today, and this is for phase two. We're moving into phase two right now. Phase one is already under construction, and we're almost done documenting phase two. So, our early sketches are coming to life bit by bit, but these are renderings still. Um, and this is that amenity space in between. It almost looks like kind of a canyon when you're seeing it from this view, which may seem kind of oppressive, but I feel like we are creating this little oasis in the center for the residents. This is the private backyard and the private amenity terrace, and then the front yard, the public yard is in the back that you can't really see. This is the front yard, the public park area. Um, So here's actually a construction photo from the building portion. They're still, I think they just had their topping out ceremony this morning, but this is when they were pouring the foundation and the planks, the slabs for the building. And you can see that they're really digging through this really beautiful bedrock, and it is breaking at times, and it can be kind of layered and difficult to work with, but we are trying to preserve as much as possible. So when we saw that this was the condition of the bedrock, we didn't quite know until it was demoed. We decided we had a path coming in through this right adjacent to the building, but we ended up changing the layout of this area because of this block. We didn't want to demo it entirely to make room for a path here. So we ended up having to adjust the design during the construction phase to relate to the site some more. And just for fun, this is even in the wall currently with graffiti and it being 30 feet, nature will still find a home. And that was a bird that I found on one of my site visits nestled into the brick. The last project that I want to show is Bronx Point, like I said, along the Harlem River. And this one's, exciting for a lot of different reasons. One is that it is a waterfront site, very different from the first two sites. And two, it's actually adjacent to uh and includes an extension of this existing park here, which is called Mill Pond Park, which Marvel actually designed back in the day. So it's really nice to be able to pick this back up again in our office and be able to connect the two sites. It's really close to this bridge here too, which is a nice view to see from the building or from the park. And you are right along this expressway, which is kind of a difficult condition to work with, but it's pretty typical for our cities to have these expressways right next to our waterfronts. So I'll get into some early design sketches. And so this is the existing park. Everything starting from the Bronx Children's Museum, wrapping your way around the tennis courts and weaving in and out of these inlets. I think this was a working waterfront in its past. So I think that's what these inlets are for. I think they were used for ships to pull up. I'm not sure, but basically the paths wind in and out, which is actually a great experience for users of the park. You go in and out, and you shift your view shed, and you really do sense that you're close to the water. And it is tidal too, so you'll see um throughout the seasons and throughout the months, um there'll be high tide and low tide, and it's almost um like a little estuary or of sorts. Um but yeah, so one of the ideas was then when we're developing this site, there'll be this building here shown in dark gray here. This is the footprint of the building for phase one. Phase two will be closer to the bridge, and then there'll be this extension of the park from next to the expressway down to the waterfront here. And there'll be this park extension, and there'll also be this waterfront esplanade. And there's these regulations for zoning in New York City, that if you have a public waterfront here, you need to have a connection to the upland. So that's what we're showing here called out. This is all tied to zoning. And it's also a really interesting case of co-ownership or divided ownership, depending on how you look at it. But the 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 hatched area here in stripes is developer maintained. So there are a couple developers that are in charge of the building and the site around it. But then Parks Department is actually in charge of maintaining the extension and the esplanade. So there's a lot of people involved in the process. We had to engage the community, and we had to get approval across many different agencies and departments. And you know, it's I'm sure there's probably an equivalent in Michigan somewhere, but there's the Academic Development Corporation and the Public Design Commission, and everyone was involved. So it was a long process to get through the design phase, but I think it'll end up being worth it. I'll show you some photos of the construction after this. But our goals were to expand Mill Pond Park, connect to the waterfront, connect to the neighborhood back, create seamless open spaces. So like I said, there are those divided territories and jurisdictions, but we really wanted to blur them as much as possible. And so if you're a user, you didn't really like care about who owned it or um or where the upland connection was compared to the esplanade and everything. But we tried to blur it a little bit. And we wanted to create active recreation areas and also, of course, be as sustainable, resilient as possible. So we're working through the design process. Once we had that kind of general massing, we ended up programming it a bit more and dividing it up a bit more. So towards the street and at this intersection, there's more of this plaza, and over towards the park, there's more of a playground and green space. And then this waterfront here is more for circulation and sitting and enjoying the views. Going from programming to a schematic plan here, showing some more detail. We also included a get down, so you can actually get down to the water here, which I thought is really cool. We don't have guardrails along the entire length. We're trying to, relate to the water more and be rooted in nature, like I've been talking about. Because just because we're in an urban environment doesn't mean we can't um, you know, relate to our site and to nature itself. So I'm going to zoom into some of the spaces. This one is the plaza, and we have this really intricate paving pattern here to kind of represent the ripples and the flow of the river. There's some seating, but you can see there's this dash line here, and this is the expressway above. So half of it is underneath an expressway. So not much could really go there in terms of trees. You can see that. But we are including some seating and lighting. This is some of our paving studies, and the the um the waves and the ripples we are actually pixelated, of course, because the pavers themselves, they weren't cut with a clean transition. They were whole pavers were used to differentiate the two boundaries, and we used a mix of different colors. We also have these precast concrete benches that kind of border the planting beds for people to sit on too. And this is an earlier view of this entry plaza. So the buildings to the right, the expressways to the left, you can see it above you. And then there's this plaza here with and on the ground floor of this affordable housing development is retail as well. And the hip hop museum. So um I think it'll be an active space down the line once it's occupied fully. And this is as you're walking down the upland connection towards the water. So you'll see these buildings in future pictures that I have, but we're looking toward the river in the back. Um, this is the waterfront esplanade. So you can see the building to the top and the river on the bottom. And a couple of things I wanted to call out here are one, the rail line that's really close by. So um, you know, it's not much of an amenity in that it's not that exciting to watch necessarily. It's freight rail, and it's not a beautiful sight, but at the same time it's a very unique situation to have a freight line next to like on a river next to a waterfront esplanade. So I think the condition is at least interesting, if not aesthetically beautiful. I think it's an interesting condition to enjoy and sit and look out. So we have these like seating nooks that you can look out towards the water. And like I said before, not everywhere do we have a sea rail. So we have sea rails at key locations where the slope is really steep, but then when the slope is more gentle, there's actually just a planting buffer in the revetment. So and that's actually how the Mill Pond Park, the existing park, does it as well. We're not trying to keep people away from the water, even though, it has to be safe, but we also don't want it to be walled off and disconnected entirely from the water. Um, Another thing I want to call out though is it's actually a planted revetment. It was an interesting detail that um that my the Jadiel, the designer for the project, spearheaded, but it's actually these containers of soil that are planted and kind of hidden within the revetment. And we wanted to, even make the revetment green. And here's a section, conceptual section of how that would work, the rail line to the right. Here's a view of that. So here's that section where there's a guardrail, but then there's also sections without it. And there's the railway to the right and the bridge in the background. The playground also we tried to reference nature as much as possible. We have boulders and planting integrated into the playground. These are just precedent images, but I have some progress construction photos to share. So this is I'm standing where the play equipment and the safety surface will be. And it'll be flush with these curbs here. This will be a slide, actually, and the boulders were pieced together meticulously and by hand to make sure that they were flat enough to maintain a clear surface on both sides of the slide. And then when you're outside of that clearance zone, we're able to have more natural build up and arrangement of boulders. But here you're seeing planting next to it as well. And these tubes are where the footings go for the play equipment. So here's that view of the waterfront esplanade, and the building. Um, and you can see these granite blocks again. These ones are actually quarried, so they're not reclaimed, unfortunately, but they are very beautiful. And so we have these mixture of these granite blocks that that are more regular and cut, and then we have these boulders that are more rough edges and natural looking, at least. And to the left you can see the revetment there as well. What I'm showing here is actually, these are my feet here, and then this is the river, and I'm using my wide angle lens to show the planting buffer that we have and the revetment going down. And then this these are basically the planted tubes that have been covered with riprap to conceal them. And you're seeing box elder and or I mean what is it? Is it box elder? Sambucus. I can't remember if it's box anyway. Elderberry maybe. And then some grasses in there too, closer down to the water, and because the grasses are actually tidal, so they can take a lot of water. Here's actually those blocks in this social seating arrangement. So we're calling it the living room in a way. This is kind of like a carpet of these blocks that were cut into slabs and placed into the ground. And then the the blocks are arranged so that a group of people could sit here actually together and not just all face in one direction. Behind it, there's fitness equipment too, of course. Here are those buildings that I highlighted earlier, those two apartment buildings across the river. And what I'm showing you here is this kind of esplanade. From to the right is the park, and to the left is the playground, and in between right here is this amazing get down path that you can actually access the water, which is right on the other side of that orange geese protection fence right there. One part that I didn't talk about that much is actually the terrace that's on the third floor, that is only for residents. So all of these residents are able to use this terrace, and we're referencing the plaza a bit with the paver colors and arrangement of the pixelation, the dark and the light mix. But here it's more they're all on pedestals, and so they are larger pavers. And we used the paver module to actually organize the planting beds so that there were minimal cuts, if any. I mean, the cuts that happened for the pavers are when it hit the parapet, because real dimensions versus nominal dimensions may vary, but you can see all of these edges have whole pavers. And here's our client here, the developer client, taking a break on one of our benches in the courtyard. So we're trying to create these little oases in these urban environments and these dense, affordable housing developments, because everyone deserves to experience nature. Here's a photo. I don't know if it grosses anybody out, but this is actually an example of nature already taking root in the park itself. This was actually a planted tree that was just planted this summer, next to the playground, and a nest was already there with some babies. And today, actually, on the site, we saw this photo is from this morning. We were on the site, and this hawk we found on one of the lampposts, and it caught one of our famous NYC rats. So you can't get much more New York than that. But that is my talk for today. I just want to, I know I breezed through a lot of them, but I just wanted to show some of the amazing projects that our office is working on, and I'm personally responsible for right now. They're all under construction, and I'm excited to be able to share final images. Hopefully, maybe next spring, I'm hoping. So stay tuned. That's it.
Thank you very much for sharing the three projects and your experiences in the process, Sammy. It was really nice to hear about your experiences and get to learn more about how you implement the design process and the different stages from design and towards implementation and construction. We will now open up the webinar to a Q&A where we will have attendees can drop in any questions they may have for Sammy in the Q&A chat box. And yeah, so that will go on for another 15 minutes.
No one has any questions, that's fine too.
So in the meantime, Sammy, I have some questions for you. I really liked here seeing your graphics and seeing, for example, for the goals and objectives for your project in Starhill, which was seeing inspiration pictures and other graphics that help in seeing the goals and objectives for the design really effectively. I wanted to ask, which out of the three projects you worked on, are any one of them one of your favorite projects?
Yeah, so it's hard not to have Bronx Point be the favorite one because it's the most far along in construction and you can see it. It's coming along very well and feels like fast, but it's really been many years in the making before my time, but I think that one, that's my favorite in the sense that it is opening soon. It should be opening the ribbon cutting is actually next month, and then I think residents are moving in soon after that. And but the other one that I really love is actually Starhill because Starhill I actually those early designs I didn't have a hand in, but I took it over for the CD process as well. And a lot of design had to happen during the construction document phase. Usually you want to do that in concept and schematic, but a lot of times things come up and um you have to adjust. So I like that I had a hand in the design for Starhill, and I think that one's the most exciting too because of the really complex existing subgrade conditions like the bedrock that's underneath it that we have to deal with and adjust in the field as we're building. And I like that the topography is so extreme and you're also creating a public amenity like Bronx Point. There's a public amenity. Bronx Grove is completely private, so that one's less exciting to me as much as it will be a beautiful project and I think it'll be loved by the residents. It's just that it's smaller and um but it'll be more like a garden, versus like a park.
That's wonderful to hear, Sammy.
Mhm.
So you also mentioned about topography, and one of the things which really captivated my interest when hearing about the projects was that in New York the grades are a lot more steeper than in Michigan. That
Yeah.
was something really interesting to learn.
Mhm.
I was wondering, how has that been for you when you moved to New York, when working in sites where the grades are more steeper?
Yeah, I think that's a really characteristic thing of the Bronx, especially. Like I was saying, there's some areas of Brooklyn that have topography, and some in Queens, although not that much to be honest. It's mostly around the edges of the waterfronts and stuff. There are some, but I think the Bronx is really particularly you know, um, steep at certain places. There's those famous steps that everybody takes, photos of. And there's the I think there's like a Joker scene in the new movie coming up with, I don't know. It's a very New York thing too, yeah, for there to be topography, but it actually relates to the geology beneath. And I think, Brooklyn was more of like a marsh wetland area, a lot like Manhattan. And then there were these, and I think underneath it is schist, if I remember correctly. And then in the Bronx, there's Nice or Nice. Can't remember which one it is. But and that's more of like, I think schist is more of like if I remember correctly, I don't know, it might be sedimentary, and then nicer schist might be, I mean nicer gneiss might be more igneous, like it's a different type of rock. So and Michigan's like that too, I guess. There's Lower Peninsula is all kind of flat and it's more sedimentary, and then the Upper Peninsula, it has more topography and has its own geology, which is more um igneous, I guess. More granites and stuff like that. Um, so in that way, it's actually kind of similar, I guess. I forgot about that. Forgot, I am biased towards the Lower Peninsula as much as I love that peninsula because I'm from the Lower Peninsula, but I can't forget the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, the UP is definitely one of a very beautiful part of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Also had another question. What were some of your experiences in collaborating with your colleagues in the projects, and what were some of the ways in which you collaborated you would recommend to students and emerging professionals entering the field as they embark in their career in the profession?
Sure. And I guess I can maybe talk more about my personal experience in terms of like, um, being a trans woman and kind of being visible and proud in that way. And I didn't think that it was going to be possible to even have a career before I transitioned. I was kind of, holding back partially because it was so intimidating and I thought I would lose my job. Um, and I thought I would basically risk all of the education and hard work that I had done leading up to transitioning. I didn't want to take that big risk. But and not to say that it doesn't have its own complications or issues or difficult days or hard days, but honestly, I'm on the construction site a lot, all these three projects, and there's actually more that are under construction, and I interface with clients, construction managers, even contractors, and you might think that that's a pretty masculine space, and it is. It's more, there are a lot of women though involved, but um I have not really, I mean, you have to kind of just enter boldly and unapologetically be yourself. And, um, sure, I'll get misgendered sometimes, or I will have to deal with just misogyny in general because it's, you know, women have their own, have our own issues with in the workplace. But um I've actually been really pleasantly surprised, like um I think it was harder when I started at first because I had to go from one name and one set of pronouns to another name and another set of pronouns, and I was also physically changing. So I had to figure out what to wear and how to, and I'm still really working on that, to be honest. And I think interacting with my coworker, I did have to come out to my coworkers at some point. That was at my last job actually. And my it was harder at first to kind of transition at a job that I already was at. And I'm not that I had any one person or anybody give me any specific difficulty or um it was just more that you had to explain yourself and you had to come out and you had to um you know correct people when they said your wrong name and your wrong pronouns. But um starting a new job as Sammy, as myself, as a woman, as a trans woman, was a lot easier. It was like a clean break, and I could kind of start from scratch. I didn't choose to leave my first job or the job that I transitioned from. I was laid off due to the pandemic. Um, but it kind of worked out in the end. I was sad to leave those coworkers, but I'm happy to be where I'm at now. So everything works out pretty well. I think the biggest thing with I still encounter is like when when I'm not shown on the screen and it's just my voice, people can still get my pronouns wrong, especially because Sammy isn't necessarily gendered one way or the other. But but I try to put my pronouns in all my emails, and I try to um even on my name on like Zoom or Teams. I don't have it here today, but sometimes I'll put my pronouns in my name. Um and if people use the wrong pronouns, I correct them because it's just not okay. It's like, you wouldn't do that to anybody else. So yeah, I think you just have to enter boldly and just, you know, be confident, and people will adjust. I think you just, and maybe that applies to people of other experiences and identities, whether it's other women or people of other sexual identities or people of different ethnicities and nationalities. I think it's hard and it's not easy, and sometimes it doesn't come naturally, but it's worth it, I think.
Thank you for sharing, Sammy.
Mhm.
Does anyone have any more questions? It looks like no one has any more questions. Sammy would like to thank you very much for joining us tonight for our Michigan ASLA Diverse Perspective Series webinar. It was really nice to have you and get to hear your experiences with
Mhm.
your projects in New York City. And yeah, the webinar will be uploaded on the Michigan ASLA Chapter Foundation channel on YouTube.
Mhm.
And for anyone who attended and anybody who couldn't attend, the webinar will be available for free on YouTube to watch after tonight. Okay.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Sammy.
All
Have a
right.
great night.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Bye.